Hello, and welcome to this Introduction to Cybersecurity course. In this course, we're going to be talking about some of the major threats and cybersecurity best practices that you might encounter every day in both your personal and professional lives. This course is going to be broken up into 6 modules, each focusing on an aspect of cybersecurity. We'll start out by talking about password security and how to create and maintain good, strong passwords. Then we'll follow on with a discussion of multi-factor authentication, or a way to really help lock down your online accounts to ensure that a cybercriminal can't take them over. In Module 3, we'll talk about the phishing threat, how to identify phishing emails, and some best practices for reducing your chance of falling for a phishing attack. In Module 4, we'll talk about online security and how to ensure that the site you're visiting is what you think it is. Next, we'll talk about device security and how you can ensure on your mobile phone that you're not falling victim to the growing attacks against these devices. Finally, in Module 6, we'll close out with the discussion of staying safe on public Wi-Fi with a focus on virtual private networks or VPNs. I look forward to being your instructor for this course. I'll see you in the following video where I'll discuss passwords. Hello, and welcome back to our Introduction to Cybersecurity course. In this video, we will start a discussion of device security. So, what is device security? Most cyber attacks and cybercriminals target users' devices. If you think about it, devices are where you store your files, where your apps run, and where pretty much everything of value to an attacker could be. If your computer is where your files, apps, and personal information are located, it's important to protect those against cyber attacks because those are cybercriminals' most likely targets. You likely have a variety of devices consisting of a mix of personal and professional devices, all of which face the potential risk of cyber attacks. One of these risks is malware. There are a wide variety of different types of malware that I'll discuss soon. Keep in mind that malware can be delivered in various ways, from internet browsing, phishing attacks, unsafe removable media like USB drives, and other means. In addition to malware, there's the chance that an attacker might have remote access to a device. For example, if you install a backdoor malware on your computer accidentally, the attacker might be able to control that device remotely. Alternatively, tools such as a remote desktop protocol and virtual private networks are designed to give remote access to an organization's systems. If an attacker can gain access to those tools, they could also remotely control those systems. Another potential risk to your devices and your network connections is eavesdropping. If an attacker can monitor your device's network connections and monitor what you're doing on your device, they might be able to learn useful information, such as login credentials or information about finances and other aspects of your personal and professional life. Another potential risk to devices mainly focused on organizations is a denial of service or DOS attack. A denial of service attack is one where the attacker's entire purpose is to deny access to a device or a service to legitimate users. For example, you might have a web page that is selling a specific product, perhaps tickets to a very popular event. A denial of service attack might be designed to just spam that service with so many requests, so many malicious login attempts to request your tickets, that legitimate users can't get through. If the attackers can succeed, then legitimate website visitors' ability to buy those tickets is degraded or lost entirely. These attacks can be serious for both small and very large organizations. Finally, personal and professional devices both suffer a risk of data breaches. From a professional context, your company probably has a lot of sensitive and personal information, customer records, intellectual property, and internal information such as the company's financial data, HR records, and much more. On your personal devices, there may be a great deal of private personal data about your life. It could include family photos, financial data, and other information you would prefer to avoid getting out there into the public. If an attacker can gain access to your devices, they may be able to access this personal data and expose it. When we mention the various threats to devices, one of the main areas of focus is malware, since many cyber attacks are going to involve malware of some form. And there are a variety of different types of malware. We've summarized a few of the most common and significant ones on this slide. First, info stealers are malware that's designed to carry out data breaches. They're trying to get onto a computer and steal login credentials, personal information, and other sensitive data from the machine. Trojans, as we discussed in an earlier video, are intended to slip under the radar and trick you into installing them. They may masquerade as legitimate software while hiding malicious functionality. Often, these Trojans are designed to give an attacker an initial entry point into a computer, and then they may download or use additional malicious functionality. You're probably familiar with ransomware attacks, designed to install on a computer and encrypt valuable data and applications on your computer. If you want your data back, you must pay the ransom. Backdoors are malware designed to provide the attacker remote access to a computer. Once they get on, the attacker explores and performs malicious actions directly on the computer. This allows for more versatility, since the functions they can do are like sitting right at the computer. A rootkit is malware that's designed to hide other malware. Your computer might have antiviruses and other endpoint security solutions designed to protect it. If you're browsing through the file system on your computer or looking at the programs running on it, you might notice that malware is running. A rootkit is designed to hide the malware from all these various means of detection by identifying request information and modifying it to make it look like the malware was never there. Adware is a type of malware designed to make money for an attacker. For advertisers, the goal is that whoever posts the ads pays the person providing those ads to serve them to users on their site. For example, if you have a legitimate product, an advertiser might pay for their ads on your website. Adware is designed to make money for the attacker by having them serve legitimate ads and pretend that people are seeing them when it's just the malware viewing them. Therefore, if the attacker is serving those ads, advertisers will pay them for getting those ads in front of somebody's eyes. Botnets are a type of malware designed to carry out large-scale attacks. The malware installs itself on computers, and then the attacker can instruct that malware to perform certain actions, such as performing a distributed denial of service attack or trying to crack passwords for a website so an attacker can gain access to accounts. Finally, cryptojackers are a type of malware that uses up computational power on an infected computer to mine cryptocurrency for the attacker's benefit. These are just a summary of a few of the main types of malware and their potential risks to your personal and professional life. Now, let's talk about a few device security best practices to help protect you against these threats. One is to use a strong password. If an attacker can guess your password for an account, whether on your computer or an online service, they can access any sensitive data functionality on that service. Another best practice is to enable full disk encryption where possible. This ensures that if your device is lost or stolen, an attacker can't read sensitive information off of it, even without knowledge of the login passwords. A third best practice that we've discussed before is using antivirus. Fourthly, using a virtual private network or VPN on untrusted networks such as public Wi-Fi. We'll dive into this one in more detail in a later module. Finally, only install programs from reputable sources. Previously, we talked about Trojan horses and Trojan malware, and ensuring that you only install software from trusted sources decreases the probability that that software is hiding malware. Thank you. Welcome back to this Introduction to Cybersecurity course. In this module, we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication. So, what is multi-factor authentication? Multi-factor authentication, or MFA, uses multiple different authentication factors. Typically, when you're logging into an account online, you may only be required to enter your password. With MFA, or two-factor authentication, you might be required to enter the combination of a password and a PIN, personal identification number, that you get in some way, or a combination of two other factors. With multi-factor authentication, there are a few different categories of factors. One of these is something you know, so this could be a password or a PIN that you have memorized and that only you should know and enter a website. Another type of factor is something you have. It might be a smartphone that receives a text or has an authenticator app that generates a one-time password or a one-time code. You might have a smart card that you can plug into a computer and then authenticate by having that smart card and entering a PIN. Or you could have a physical security token, like a YubiKey, or something similar that provides a code that acts as a second authentication factor. In all these cases, you have something physical in your possession that helps prove you are who you claim. The third type of factor is something you are, also called biometrics. So, fingerprint recognition, facial recognition, iris scanning, or anything that measures some unique characteristic of your body is an example of biometric authentication. For a system to implement multi-factor authentication, it must draw from two or more categories here. So, for example, having a password and a PIN that are both something you know doesn't count as multi-factor authentication because those are both knowledge-based factors. However, if you have a password and a code that's texted to you or generated on your phone, that's an example of MFA. In the following video, we will discuss why to use MFA rather than just relying on a password. Hello, and welcome back to this Introduction to Cybersecurity course. In this module, we will discuss online security threats and potential security risks of using the internet. Let's start with an introduction to online security. The internet is an invaluable tool both in professional and personal lives. People use the internet every day and potentially for multiple hours a day. In a professional context, information and resources found online are essential to many employees' roles in an organization. This is especially true with the growth of cloud computing and software as a service or SaaS applications. Applications such as Gmail, Zoom, Slack, and Dropbox. These apps are accessible via the internet, and companies increasingly rely on them for their day-to-day operations. However, it also comes with security risks. Some of those threats you might face online include phishing pages. In a previous module, we talked about phishing emails. Often those emails have malicious links that direct you to malicious web pages. They could include fake logins designed to harvest login credentials. They could consist of malware intended to download. You can find these pages via phishing emails, or you might end up on them during normal web browsing. These phishing pages can do various things, including providing malicious downloads. There might be threats such as Trojan horses or malware designed to exploit vulnerabilities in your browser to install itself on the computer. There are also threats internal to the browser, like cross-site scripting designed to steal information entered on a web page, leading to our third potential online threat of information harvesting. One of the classic ploys of a phishing page is to imitate a trusted website. You enter your username and password, which gets sent to the attacker rather than your intended organization. That's one type of information that can be harvested online. It's also possible that information can be collected from various sites you used, information posted online, or other collection methods. The internet can be an invaluable tool for personal and professional life, but it also carries substantial security risks. We'll discuss these risks and how to remediate them in the rest of this section. I look forward to seeing you in the following video. Hello, and welcome back to this introduction to cybersecurity. This module, the course is all about passwords and password security. Let's start with an introduction to passwords. Most kids learn about passwords and their use. They ask for the secret password for gaining access to a clubhouse or while playing a game. In daily life, we use dozens or even hundreds of passwords to access various computers and online accounts. In a nutshell, a password is a method of authentication. It's a method to prove that someone is who they claim to be, and passwords work as an authentication mechanism because they operate under the assumption that only a legitimate user, or only you, knows your password. If you provide a password to a system and that password is correct, the assumption is that you've kept your password a secret and you have to be you. This authentication, using passwords or other methods, is central to access control in cybersecurity. If you want to limit people's access to sensitive data, computers, applications, networks, you typically have access controls based on a user's identity. Suppose Bob has access to certain files, specific computers, etc., And the purpose of this password or other authentication mechanism is to prove that Bob is Bob. Then you can apply those access controls. Now let's talk about how our passwords work in the real world. In theory, an application stores someone's password, or more accurately, a version of a user's password. If the computer stored your real password in a file and then compares the password you provided with one stored on the computer, someone could gain access to that password file and gain access to everyone's account. How computers and applications work is they store a hash of the password instead of the password itself. Hash functions are essentially just mathematical functions that are one way. You can go from password to hash, but you can't go from hash back to password. They're also deterministic, meaning that if you hash the same value or the same password multiple times, you always get the same result. And this is why we can use password hashes for authentication. Because if a user provides their password to the system, that password is hashed using the same algorithm as when they initially set up their account, and so it should produce the same password. So if those two password hashes match, the passwords match, and the users are granted access to the system. Passwords are some of the most commonly used methods of authentication. There are certainly many other options out there, but most, if not all, of your online accounts and computer accounts that you use daily have your authentication with a password. The reason for this is that passwords have a bunch of advantages, as well as a few downsides. One of the biggest advantages of passwords is that they're easy to implement, because all you have to do is set it up so a user can enter a password. And you compare that password, or more accurately, the password hash, to one that's stored on the application. Very easy to code and do correctly, so it's an attractive authentication mechanism for developers. Another advantage to passwords is comprehensibility. A password is something that everyone understands. They know how it works. If you say create a password, log in with a password, people know what to do. Other authentication mechanisms require more explanation for how they work, why they're secure, etc. As such, people might not follow them as well. Therefore, an excellent comprehensible authentication mechanism like a password is appealing. Related to this comprehensibility is usability. Passwords are easy to use. You know this piece of information, this password, you type it into the system, it validates that it's correct, and you're into your account. From a security perspective, one of the advantages of passwords is that they're changeable. If your password's exposed so that there's a data breach, or if you forget it, you can change that password, regain access to your account, and lock anyone who has your old password out of it. These are some substantial advantages. However, passwords aren't a perfect authentication mechanism. A couple of the reasons why include weak passwords. In theory, every single one of your passwords is long, unique, random, etc. But is that really true? Many people use the same password on multiple accounts or use an easily memorable password, and this is good for them, but it isn't good for security. We'll talk about that more in a later video. Another downside to passwords is that they can be forgotten. If you need to remember your password, you can only access your account if you go through the password reset process. Password resets are no fun for anyone. They are poor for usability and poor for security. Clicking through those prompts and answering questions you don't really remember isn't a lot of fun for you. And on the security side, providing a way to circumvent that password where someone can access your account without knowing your password isn't great for security. Passwords are a common authentication mechanism, but they're not necessarily a good one, as we'll explore in later videos. Hello, and welcome to this module in which we'll be discussing phishing attacks. Phishing is one of the most common attack vectors and can be used to accomplish various goals. In this video, we will start with an introduction to phishing. To start, let's explain what phishing is. A phishing attack is generally something that manipulates someone to do something that the attacker wants. And this is specifically over some form of messaging platform. The most common phishing medium is email, but as we'll discuss later, you can perform phishing over various means. But in general, we're talking about sending a message rather than going up to someone in person and trying to con them that way. The goal of the phishing attack is to get someone to do something the attacker wants, whether installing malware, handing over sensitive data, revealing their credentials, etc. And phishers will use a variety of different techniques to accomplish this goal. For example, one very common technique is deception. Often, phishing emails are designed to look like a legitimate email from someone you trust. A very common pretext is sending an email from a big organization you're familiar with, Netflix, Apple, or Amazon, etc., claiming that there's something wrong with your account and that you need to resolve it. You click on the link and it doesn't take you where you expect to go, and you end up handing over your login credentials to an attacker who can then use your account. Another way that phishers can trick people into doing what they want is via coercion. For example, there are blackmail phishing scams that sometimes mix coercion and deception. They claim to have caught you on video doing something embarrassing. They threaten that they will reveal the video if you don't do what they want, which could be money paid to them or handing over your credentials. It might be obvious that an attacker is involved here, but you will do what they say because you don't want that embarrassing video to get out there. Thirdly, phishers might use manipulation. It could be combined with other techniques, but the goal is to convince you, without realizing it, to do what the attacker wants. There are three techniques that are commonly used in phishing emails. We'll discuss the psychology behind phishing later, but first, let's talk about the wide variety of goals an attacker might have in a phishing attack. Phishing attacks are common because they're easy to perform, cheap to perform, scale well, and work sometimes. And if they work, they provide the attacker with various benefits. They can use this attack in different ways. For example, they might be able to steal data. We discussed how email is one of the most common means of performing phishing attacks. It's also the most common means by which employees and an organization communicate with one another. It's common for vast amounts of sensitive data to flow over email between internal accounts or accounts with partners. Hence, if an attacker can trick someone into sending one of those emails to the wrong location, they can gain access to that sensitive data. Another common target of phishing attacks is user credentials. We discussed how you might have a supposed account issue with your Netflix accounts. You try to log in and hand over your credentials because you're putting them into a website controlled by the attacker. This is a simple method they use to get credentials that they could use to access your account themselves, or they could sell it onto the black market to someone else who wants to use that account. The third goal of phishing that shows up more in a business context is stealing money. Cybercrime is a business, and for some cybercriminals, their entire objective is money. Phishing provides an opportunity to get money out of someone they've scammed. Often, phishing attacks are geared towards tricking an organization into paying an invoice that doesn't exist. Or if they steal your login credentials, they may be able to use those credentials to make purchases and send what they purchased to themselves. Finally, another common goal of phishing is to install malware. Phishing gets them into your email account. It might provide them with your credentials or data. But if they can use that to install malware on your computer, they can use that access for a much more comprehensive range of potential goals. These are some of the goals of a phishing attack, but phishing can be used as a starting point for various cyber attack campaigns. Phishing is common, and it comes in a variety of different forms. Let's briefly discuss some of the main types of phishing. Let's start with phishing in general. Phishing is an umbrella term for this type of attack, and often it's considered attacks that are general in nature. For example, those attacks pretending to be Netflix and saying you have an issue with your account. An attacker can simply send out an email claiming that there's an issue, send that email to many people, and they'll likely have a low chance of success, but a 1% chance of success when you've sent thousands of emails or millions of emails still results in many successful attacks. In contrast, something like spear phishing is a much more targeted attack. For example, the attacker will research the individual or a small group that they want to trick or phish, and they will tailor their phishing attack to that individual. They might reference something like a recent trip or projects you might be working on with someone, and try to make this email look as believable as possible. It's much more targeted. It's much harder to perform, but it has a higher probability of success and potentially a more significant payoff if it works. Business Email Compromise, or BEC, is an example of a common type of spear phishing attack. As its name suggests, it's targeting business emails, and the goal is to make money. This is the type of attack in which someone will send you a fake invoice or update the payment details for a supplier, etc. When you see the invoice, you might say to yourself, I can't believe I didn't pay this. You rush off to pay it and don't realize that you never ordered the service or already received the invoice. Alternatively, if they convince you to update the bank payment details, the next time you get a legitimate invoice from that supplier, you could potentially just send it to the new information you have on file, and it goes straight to the cybercriminal. Whaling is another example of spear phishing attack. It gets its name since cybercriminals are going for the big fish in the organization. So, whaling targets could be high-level executives, senior management, or someone that has power or great responsibility within the organization. These attacks can be very effective. They work because if you can trick the CEO into saying that something has to be completed, everyone else in the organization will follow their orders. Hence, the attacker can cause much damage by tricking one person. Smishing and vishing are phishing attacks that occur over media other than email, and we'll dive into smishing later on in this course. But essentially, smishing is phishing over SMS text messages. Vishing stands for voice phishing, and it's phishing over the phone. These are some of the main types of phishing and introduction to phishing. In later videos, we'll dive into this in more detail. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to this Introduction to Cybersecurity course. In this module, we're going to start out our discussion of VPNs with an introduction to VPNs. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. VPNs are useful since most people do not have dedicated connections to corporate networks. If you're working remotely and accessing certain sensitive information, you need to do so over the public internet. This creates the potential for eavesdropping or other security issues. Using a VPN creates a virtual private network on top of an existing public network. Data is encrypted from point A to point B, helping to make that data difficult to read. It's as if you have a direct connection to that remote site. VPNs are used for a variety of different purposes. One common use is securing corporate data. If you're a remote worker or have a hybrid work schedule, odds are if you're working from home or another location, the company will likely request or require that you use a VPN to connect to the company system. This helps ensure that eavesdroppers won't be able to see anything interesting or sensitive about your network traffic. Another common use of VPNs is maintaining personal privacy. For example, if you've got an internet connection, that internet connection goes through your internet service provider, ISP, so your activity may not be private. Using a VPN ensures your activity remains private since your data passes through this encrypted tunnel. VPNs can also hide where your data is coming from. VPNs are also commonly used to protect the anonymity of journalists, activists, and others in areas where revealing their identity to the public could put them in danger. If you're writing stories that people in power don't want to hear, then concealing your identity and location is very important. VPNs are useful for staying safe on public Wi-Fi. If you're connected to a public Wi-Fi network, everyone connected to that network and the Wi-Fi operator can potentially see your network traffic. Therefore, having a VPN helps to protect against malicious Wi-Fi operators or eavesdroppers. Finally, some people use VPNs to evade geofencing or geo-blocking. If a protection or service isn't available in your country, a VPN can use IP addresses to appear they are connecting from that country. There are ways to detect VPN, so it only sometimes works out. That's our quick introduction to VPN. We're going to dive more into VPNs, including their security benefits. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to our discussion of device security. In this video, we will talk about choosing and using an antivirus. We're discussing antivirus as a device security solution, and such an important one because malware is a significant threat to device security. There are many different types of malware that can be installed on your device. An antivirus can be helpful due to the ability to identify, quarantine, and even remove malware from infected devices. Ideally, the antivirus is going to detect that malware and block it from installing. But if that doesn't happen, the antivirus solution can take action to help clean up afterward and ensure your device is no longer infected. So, antivirus is a handy tool because if you install it and have it running frequent scans on your computer, you can dramatically reduce your risk of malware issues. How does one of these antiviruses work? An antivirus can work in several ways, including signature-based, anomaly-based, or behavior-based analysis. The signature-based analysis uses unique identifiers of known malware to identify that malware when it tries to infect your machine. For example, if a new ransomware variant is identified, security researchers are going to pull out some unique aspects of that malicious file and build it into a signature. Once your antivirus has that signature, it will be detected and blocked if that malware tries to sneak onto your device. However, this doesn't work for all malware and only works for malware where that signature already exists. There are other ways that antiviruses can detect malware. Another is anomaly-based detection. This type of analysis looks for oddities and what's happening on your computer. For example, if a specific executable is opening and modifying many files on your computer, that could be atypical and a potential sign of a ransomware attack. The antivirus or other endpoint security solution can identify this oddity and take action based on the activity and remove that potential threat. It's possible that this might not actually be malware, that you could have a false potential. But at least by acting and notifying you that a potential threat exists, you have an opportunity to find this malware. A third way in which antivirus could detect and block malware is behavior-based analysis. Knowing that ransomware tends to open files and change their contents, the antivirus endpoint security solution could look for that behavior, like a backdoor malware calling out to a malicious domain to allow the attacker to connect to your computer. Antiviruses can detect certain types of malware by looking for these behaviors, even if it's never seen them before. An effective antivirus will combine multiple different techniques together to maximize its chance of detecting and remediating a potential malware infection on your computer. What should we look for in an antivirus? A couple of examples include a reputable manufacturer. There are multiple reputable antivirus and endpoint security solution manufacturers out there, so it's essential to get one from a trusted company. If you're downloading something that claims to be an antivirus, it could easily be malware. Antivirus has a lot of power and authority on your computer, which can easily be abused if that file is malicious. Another consideration is the price point. Some antiviruses are designed to be used by the average person and are priced affordably. Other ones might be designed for large enterprises or organizations with extremely dangerous risks like malware, such as the financial or healthcare industry. Those are going to be a lot more expensive. As we discussed with Trojans, it could be potentially dangerous if it comes for free. However, that doesn't necessarily apply to ones with a freemium model. You get the antivirus free with upgradable features for a price, and that could be perfectly fine. A third consideration is device compatibility. Most of us have a variety of different devices that might run different operating systems. For example, you might have a Windows computer and an Android or Apple phone. You can often find endpoint security solutions or antiviruses that work on multiple devices. It can therefore be helpful if you can use the same solution on all your systems, rather than having a different one for each device. Finally, it doesn't hurt to look for additional features. An antivirus might offer additional functionalities such as ad blocking that are simpler to deploy in one solution than buying, installing, and managing multiple different pieces of software. None of these are deal breakers, but it doesn't hurt to look for them in an antivirus. Now, let's discuss using an antivirus effectively. Only installing an antivirus on a computer provides very limited benefits. For example, having the antivirus file on your computer doesn't help if it's not running. It must be running and scanning to detect and remediate a malware infection. Some best practices include using a reputable antivirus to make sure it's coming from an organization that you trust and that creates real antivirus solutions. Install updates promptly. We've touched on this earlier. Often those updates are updates to those signatures for the malware. You need to install those updates to be protected against the latest threats. Ensure you schedule regular scans. If an antivirus is going to help detect and block malware as quickly as possible, it needs to run on its schedule and frequently, not when you already think that you have malware. To conclude this video, remember that an antivirus or endpoint security solution is an excellent option to help protect your device against malware. Ensure you get a good antivirus solution and follow these best practices to help get the best possible security benefit. Thank you. Hello and welcome back. In this module, we're going to talk about URLs or addresses for web pages and why it's essential to pay attention to those when browsing online. Let's start by explaining what a URL is. Firstly, URL is known as Uniform Resource Locator. Each web page you visit is just a file or files stored on a computer somewhere. When you're typing in an address to the address bar, and then that URL includes additional pieces as you browse through the website, the goal is to provide you with a means of finding web content online. This would get you to the correct computer and the correct file on that computer. The URL is the address in the bar at the top of your web browser that tells your computer what file you're looking at. It's essential to know how URLs work to protect you against phishing. URLs have a set structure to ensure web browsers can visit the web pages that you want to visit. There are no structures specific to one web server or one particular type of browser, and this structure is made up of a few different fields, each with a specific purpose. Let's review the image on this slide and how it breaks a web URL into specific important pieces of information. Let's start from the middle, where we see domain name. In this example, it's a website's name. It would be the equivalent of something like Google. If you're visiting Google's main website, you will type in google.com. That includes the domain name and then also a top-level domain. Some common examples of top-level domains are .com, .net, .gov, and .edu. Those domains can be defined as other domains. You can go down as far as you want. Certain top-level domains are assigned to specific purposes and generally have varying levels of trust. For example, a .edu domain should be associated with an educational institution. .gov is a government domain. Other top-level domains are specific to certain countries, such as .uk for United Kingdom, .ca for Canada, or .za for South Africa. Each top-level domain has different domains specific to a given organization. For example, google.com under the .com top level. However, Google has multiple additional services: Gmail, Google Sheets, Search, Docs, etc. That's where the concept of a subdomain comes into play. In some cases, organizations will define subdomains to break out different areas of their website. So you'd have a separate mail.google.com versus www.google.com versus doc.google.com. It's not a requirement that everything be under just the default subdomain. Notice that all of these different domains, the top level, the domain name, the subdomains, etc., are separated by periods. If we go to the last one, in this example, that would be your top level domain, .com. To its immediate left is the domain name, website.com. Next, we have one or more subdomains. In this example, we have one, www. It's important to note that having multiple different subdomains is important in cybersecurity. A website might have a URL designed to look legitimate, but is instead malicious by using multiple domains. For example, imagine instead of www.website.com, we have www.website.com.evilsite.com. Looking at the beginning of the domains, you'd see www.website.com. You might be led to believe it's legitimate. If we read this right to left, this site is owned by evilsite.com, not website.com. So it's important to read those out from right to left. After the domains, we have subdirectories separated by forward slashes. We have websitename.com. There's a course directory, and then there's a page how to use this within that directory. This maps out the file structure on the web server. Finally, a URL might include query strings designed to carry information to that website. For example, in this example, we have a coupon code. If you're visiting this website for this course, you have a coupon code that provides a discount. When you first visit the site, you're providing that coupon code so they can track it for your session. I'm mentioning this since understanding how a URL works is essential to identifying phishing pages. If you have that www.websitename.com.evilsite.com, it belongs to evilsite.com, not websitename.com. Knowing that difference is vital for knowing who owns that web page. Phishers and other cybercriminals use various techniques to create real-looking malicious URLs. Our first example is lookalike characters. At first glance, most reviewers of this domain would think it reads https www.example.com and spelled normally. However, note these two highlights there. The AE highlighted in example isn't an A, it's an alpha, a completely different character. Similarly, the L in example is a capital I. It looks the same, but it's different. The intent here is to show that it's effortless to make a domain that looks legitimate but is malicious. Our second example here is URL encoding. We have something that looks legitimate, www.goodsite.com. Notice after goodsite.com, there's a bunch of strange-looking characters. Those characters are designed to allow URLs to use characters that are reserved. For example, there are limitations to using a period or slashes in a URL because they have a particular meaning in that URL. A malicious person could use encoding, and then the site can decode them at the other end. In this example, this encoding hides the fact that this site doesn't belong to goodsite.com. As we discussed previously with our www.goodsite.com example, those characters would be encoded to evilsite.com. When your browser visits the site, it'll decode this to evilsite.com, so it's essential to check the address when you're on the page to see if it might have transformed from what you're expecting. Then a third common technique is to use plausible domains. Let's assume you want to talk to customer support from a company. You might see a URL for company-support.com and click on that link in a phishing email. You then discover that the URL company-support.com doesn't belong to the correct company. It should be support.company.com. If it's a different domain name, it's a different website. So, the use of plausible domains can be used to trick people into thinking they're visiting a valid site when they're not. This concludes this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to our discussion of phishing attacks. In this video, we will discuss the psychology of phishing and how cybercriminals can get people to do what they want. Phishing is all about manipulation or convincing someone to do what the attacker wants. The phisher is always attempting to get their target to do something, whether that's to click on a link, open an attachment, or reply to an email. This is because phishing is often the starting point in an attack. The phishers are trying to steal data, compromise credentials, plant malware, or potentially steal money. If their target doesn't do what the phisher needs them to do to move on to the next stage in attack, the attack does not happen. In the end, an ignored phishing email is a failed one. Ideally, if you receive a phishing email, you should say the suspicion and report it to your information technology department because that helps protect the rest of the organization. But if you at least don't click on the link, open the attachment, or reply to the email, then at least your computer, your email, and your data aren't being targeted by the attacker. Phishers are trying to get you to do something. So, how do they do it? Often, scammers and phishers use psychological manipulation to achieve their goals. Psychology is an ancient field. There's been a lot of research into the principles of persuasion, or how to get someone to do what you want. Various career paths use psychological manipulation, and I'm sure a few come to your mind, including cybercriminals. The author and psychologist Robert Cialdini published 7 persuasion principles that describe how you can get someone to do what you want. One of these is reciprocity. Reciprocity is the quid pro quo. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. For example, with reciprocity, an attacker might provide you with something that you perceive as valuable. So they'll do something for you, and in response, they expect you to do something back. You've gotten a gift, and you're supposed to give a gift back. And that gift might be clicking on a link, providing credentials, handing over some data, etc. By building this expectation of a response, the scammer can get you to do what they want. Another of the principles of persuasion that scammers use is authority. For example, you might have a phisher who pretends to be the organization's CEO. If they can convince you that they are the CEO, you should do it. Because the CEO oversees the organization. They're the ones who say what everyone's supposed to be doing. Thus, if this person is the CEO, you should follow their orders. The third principle of persuasion is social proof. Social proof boils down to the bandwagon effect, or wanting to do things that everyone else does. For example, in an office context, it's not uncommon that if some of the workers work late, others will feel obligated to work late as well. No one wants to be seen as the one leaving first. If a scammer or phisher can convince their target that everyone's doing this, like jumping on the bandwagon, they're more likely to do what the attacker wants. The fourth Cialdini principle is unity, which reinforces being part of a group. If you can convince someone that they're part of a group, they're more likely to act as part of that group. Scammers might try to convince their targets that they are part of this group. This group is taking some action, so they should take this action as well. Another common principle for persuasion used in phishing attacks is scarcity. If a human perceives an asset as scarce, they're more likely to want it immediately or try to get it quickly. For example, if you see something like on a website that there are only 5 remaining, you're more likely to click promptly to buy whatever that is because you might miss out otherwise. A scammer might try to convince you that if you wait too long to decide to do whatever they want, you'll miss out on that opportunity. By creating that sense of urgency and forcing you to make that decision quickly, you have a better chance of missing the warning signs or the red flags of that phishing. The sixth principle of persuasion is consistency. This boils down to doing what you said you would or following your past behavior. If you've committed to a particular stance, if you've acted in a certain way in the past, you're more likely to continue doing so. A phisher might use this by saying, in the past, you donated to charities X, Y, and Z. We need your help here. Can you continue your donation? You may be convinced to provide donation information that sends that money to the scammer. By reinforcing that this is something that you've done in the past, it's shown that it was important to you in the past. As such, it's more likely that you'll decide to do it again. Finally, people are more likely to do something for someone they enjoy. If you like someone, you're more likely to listen to them or to value their opinion. If a phisher can convince you that there's someone like you, someone you like, or someone whose opinion you value, you're more likely to listen to them and do what they want, which is to take some action that harms the organization. These are some examples of the underlying principles that scammers use to trick people into carrying out their attacks. We'll look at these in a little more detail when examining some phishing emails later. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to this Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of passwords and password security. In this video, we will talk about what makes a good password. To understand what a good password is, it's helpful to understand how passwords can be broken. Passwords can be cracked or compromised in a few different ways. One of these is data breaches. Let's assume that you've set up a password-based authentication on some websites and some applications. As we discussed, password-based authentication works by providing a password to the system, and that password is compared to a stored password match. This means that every website you use passwords to authenticate has a list of password hashes. If there's a data breach, an attacker can access that list of password hashes. And while this isn't enough for them to learn your passwords, it does mean they have the opportunity to do so. If an attacker can guess your password and check it against the hash by essentially taking that guess, hashing it in the same way, and comparing the two hashes, they could potentially learn your password. If that happens, it has potential security implications for that account and others. We'll talk about that in just a moment. A second way that passwords are broken is via dictionary attacks. So you want your password to be memorable so you don't forget it and go through the password reset process. You might decide to create a password that is based on a dictionary, a pet name, a name of a kid, a favorite sport, etc. Cybercriminals know that this is how many people develop their passwords, and they take that into account in their attacks. Many password cracking tools have these large dictionaries of words, particular languages, and common passwords, and they check them all. If they have that hash from a data breach previously, they can run through all the options and test them against your hash. If you have a password that is similar enough or simple enough, then they can get it in that way. The third way that passwords are broken is through a brute force attack. A brute force attack essentially means trying everything until you find the right password. If you know that password is 8 characters long, there's a finite number of 8-character long passwords and a list. It's possible to try them all. It's extremely time consuming and in most cases too time consuming to be feasible. Thus, a brute force attack is guaranteed to work eventually, but it doesn't mean that it's a feasible attack vector if you have a strong password. We want to design our password to protect against these types of attacks. Let's dive into that a little bit further. The first threat we have to consider is breached credential, so something that's exposed in a data breach. This type of attack takes advantage of reused passwords. There's something called a credential stuffing attack, where they try credentials breached on one site on multiple other sites. For example, you might have a password for a simple website or a social media site. You might use that same username and password on, for example, your bank. If that's the case, if that social media site gets breached and they learn your password there, a cybercriminal will immediately try logging into your bank with that password. You might think, oh, they might not know where my bank is. There's a limited number of banks and they can just try them all. Therefore, if you have the same password for multiple accounts, your password security is only as strong as the security of the weakest. This is why it's essential to use unique passwords for all your online accounts. That way, if there's a breach on one account, it doesn't affect the rest. Password managers can help with this, and we'll talk more about them in a later video. Another potential threat to your password security is dictionary attacks. Most people use easily guessable passwords. To illustrate this, on the right side of the slide, we see the list of the top 10 most common passwords. Password 123456, 1234567889, etc. Obviously, if these are the most common passwords, it will be easy for an attacker to gain access to many accounts. What they're going to attempt is to try password. They're going to try these numeric combinations. They're going to try something like QWERTY123, and they'll branch out from there. You might be saying to yourself, well, I don't use password as my password. I use some character substitutions. For example, instead of that A in password, I have an @ sign, a couple of dollar signs instead of the double S, and a 0 for the O. This helps me meet the password complexity requirements that a website or my organization requires. Yes, you've done that, but cybercriminals also know that these character substitutions are common, and it's not that hard to check. Instead of just checking password with an @ as an A and a dollar sign for an S, all those iterations add microseconds to the time it takes to crack the password. While this might make the password look complex, it's really not. Therefore, it's important to use a random password or one that's not based on a dictionary word, the pattern on a keyboard, etc. The potential threat to passwords is a brute force attack. A brute force attack tries every possible password. So this type of attack is guaranteed to work eventually. When we say eventually, we mean that if you've created a strong password, it will probably never work. If it's long enough, it's random enough, if it uses a wide enough character set, it will take too long to crack that password. However, if you're using a password that's too short or too simple, then a brute force attack can absolutely work because you're up against the increase in computational speed, power, etc. Several years ago, perhaps a 6-character password that was completely random and using letters, numbers, and symbols might have been strong enough that a computer couldn't crack it in a reasonable amount of time. Today, those types of passwords are cracked almost instantaneously. When creating a password, it's important to use one that's long enough to stay secure for a while and that's completely random. So, these are the 3 main threats to passwords: how they're broken, either through data breaches, dictionary attacks, or force, and how we can design our passwords to protect against these. I'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to our discussion of VPNs. In the previous video, we talked about what a VPN is. Now, let's dive into why you should consider using one. A VPN is designed to create a secure connection between 2 points. We'll dive more into that part of this in a later video. However, in a nutshell, that data will be encrypted as it flows between the 2 endpoints at either end of the VPN connection. Since VPNs use strong encryption, data becomes much more secure. If data traffic is passing through public networks, there might be eavesdroppers, but if you have a robust encryption algorithm and a secret key, it doesn't matter. Nobody can use that data as it's flowing between you and the other VPN. Why do we suggest using VPNs? There are a few different reasons. One is protecting against eavesdropping. So if your data is encrypted en route, nobody can read it. That means that if your data is passing through an untrusted Wi-Fi router on a public Wi-Fi network, going through an ISP, or traveling anywhere else on the internet you don't want that data in your web browsing to be exposed to a third party, it's encrypted until it reaches its destination. That can help protect against eavesdropping and secure against potential privacy breaches. Another common application of VPNs is to control access to corporate networks. Often, people are increasingly working remotely. This means that a company needs to expose specific software and computers to remote users so they can complete their tasks. If they make all of those systems and applications available on the public internet, there's a much greater chance that an attacker will be able to exploit them and gain access to them. Companies will often use a VPN, where you must authenticate and have a secured connection to the VPN endpoint. Data traffic is routed to its intended destination from there, which ensures that only VPN users can connect to the corporate network. It also ensures all data traffic goes through points where it can be inspected for malicious content and potential cyber attacks before it reaches these other vulnerable or potentially vulnerable applications. Ideally, these systems applications would have their own access controls and be resilient against attack. However, a VPN restricting access makes it harder for an attacker to exploit any vulnerability that could be there. Finally, you can use a VPN to help protect your devices against attacks. For example, you might have noticed when you're connected to wireless networks that your device might ask whether that's a public or a private network. This is because the device will allow certain things on private networks that it doesn't let on public networks. You might have access to file shares on the network or share files on the network on private ones, not public ones. There are various other things that someone with access to the same network as you might have a higher probability of success attacking you if they're on that same network. If you have a VPN, you're on your own. Because all your traffic is encrypted, nobody else has that direct access to you that they would have if you were connected to the same public Wi-Fi network. The virtual private network decreases the opportunity to attack and exploit your devices. In the end, VPNs can be used for a variety of different reasons. Helping protect your personal privacy, helping to protect the organization, and reducing your chances of attack. So, if you're connected to an untrusted network or working remotely, it's a good idea to use a VPN or a similar solution. Thank you. In the previous video, we talked about what multi-factor authentication is. In this video, I'll discuss why MFA is recommended. In a previous module, we talked about passwords and how they're the most common form of authentication. Most or all of your online accounts, computers, and devices require you to enter your password to gain access. They're easy to implement, easy to use. As such, they're a very common method of authentication. However, they have relatively weak security. Passwords can be breached. Numerous examples of companies were compromised by cybercriminals who stole their password hashes and cracked those hashes to steal user passwords. There's also the fact that while passwords theoretically are long, random, and unique, in reality, many people use the same password for multiple accounts, and these passwords might be based on a word or be too short to be secure. Though we often use passwords for authentication, there are better authentication methods. The reason why many websites and other accounts are pushing for MFA is because MFA helps to bolster authentication security. So instead of just using a password, MFA requires two or more authentication factors. A common example of multi-factor authentication is a password and a one-time password or one-time PIN. And you can get this one-time password delivered to you via various methods. It could be emailed, texted to you, or sent through a phone call. It could be generated by an authenticator app or a physical security token like a YubiKey. There are multiple options which have varying levels of security, as we'll discuss in the following video. Whether you're using a password, an OTP, or some other combination of authentication factors, it's harder for an attacker to access your online account. If they're trying to authenticate as you, more than just having your password is required. To log into your account, you need both the password and the one-time password. Stealing those multiple authentication factors is much more complicated than stealing just one, especially when you have something that changes over time. For example, if your password is static and I steal it, it will be usable for months as long as you keep it the same. However, a one-time password you're using to log into your account that's texted or emailed to you typically expires in 15 minutes or less. This means that you have a much tighter window to use that authentication factor you've stolen, and shrinking that window makes it harder for an attacker to gain access to your account. We'll discuss choosing a strong authentication factor. I look forward to seeing you there. Hello, and welcome back to our Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of multi-factor authentication. In this video, we will discuss how you can choose strong authentication factors to protect your account. Not all multi-factor authentication methods are created equal. Some have better security than others. I mentioned in an earlier video that passwords have relatively weak security. They're common because they're easy to implement and use, but can be guessed or breached. For example, we looked at the top 10 most common passwords, which are all really bad passwords. Remember the example password 123456? If we're relying on a password to protect an account, and that password isn't strong, random, and unique, then there's a chance that an attacker might compromise that account. Another example of weak MFA factor is SMS-based MFA. This is another common form of authentication, where a website will text you a one-time code that you can enter into the page as your second factor. This was an example of a something you have factor because you need to access the smartphone to get the MFA. SMS-based MFA is pretty common, but it's actually been considered insecure for over 5 years now. The reason why is there are multiple different methods that code could be stolen by, whether intercepted over the mobile network or if you're the victim of a SIM swapping attack, which is when an attacker goes into a phone store and gets a new SIM card for your phone number, claiming to be you and that your card was lost or stolen. If they can get a SIM card for your account, all of your texts go to them. Therefore, SMS-based one-time passwords go to them as well. Also, with smartphones, you probably have your phone configured so that you get a preview of messages on the lock screen without unlocking your phone. They'll check if that's an SMS-based one-time password text. That password is visible without unlocking the phone, and someone could get access to your account with access to your phone. SMS-based one-time passwords aren't a secure option. Finally, some types of MFA factors are vulnerable to phishing. If you've been tricked into handing over that factor, then there's a chance that that might happen, and you're tricked into revealing that second factor, that first step there to an attacker. So basically, any type of factor that involves you typing in a code or password that you've memorized from a text, gotten from an app, are potentially vulnerable to phishing effects. In contrast, something like biometrics, where you put a finger on a fingerprint scanner or use facial recognition, are less vulnerable to phishing because you can't be tricked into handing over a finger. In general, any form of MFA is better than no MFA, because if you're using just a password, that's weaker than, for example, using a password and even an SMS-based one-time password. However, some forms of multi-factor authentication are better and more secure than others. If you have options, which type of multi-factor authentication should you choose? In some cases, this is a moot point. For example, a website might only offer text-based MFA or email-based MFA. If that's the only option, by all means turn it on. But if you're given a choice, use something that offers better security. Biometrics is an excellent choice for a second factor. If you can configure something that requires you to provide a fingerprint, use facial recognition, etc., in addition to a password or some other factor, then go for that. Biometrics is a very secure form of multi-factor authentication. Using something like a security key, like a YubiKey, that you could plug into your computer or use a smartphone to perform that multi-factor authentication is also a great option. In some cases, assume the keys are not vulnerable to phishing because there's no code you could accidentally hand over to an attacker. Another strong option is an authenticator app. We'll talk more about those in a later video. Since they generate codes on the device rather than transmitting them to that device, they offer better security than an SMS-based one-time password. Finally, a smart card is also a good form of multi-factor authentication. They work by providing a physical device that stores digital certificates that prove your identity author. There are often many different options out there for types of MFA. Different sites or different applications may only offer certain types, so consider using whatever is available. If something more substantial like biometrics, security key, authenticator apps, or smart cards is available, consider using those over an SMS-based one-time password. Hello, and welcome back to our Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of password security. In this video, we're going to look at exactly how difficult it is for an attacker to crack a weak password. What we have here is a site that is designed to calculate how secure your password actually is. Before we provide any demonstrations here, it's important to note that you should never ever enter your password into a website like this. Because even though this site, for example, claims that passwords are never stored, and even if they were, we have no idea who you are, there's a chance that your password could be compromised and used by an attacker. It's very easy for someone just to store the passwords that have been here and add them to their cracking dictionary. That said, a site like this is interesting because it demonstrates how strong passwords actually are. So, let's look at how long it takes to crack a very simple password. So, we saw that the most common password out there is password. If I type in the word password, our timing to crack that password is 0 seconds. The reason for this is a variety of factors. It's only uppercase and lowercase letters, so no numbers and symbols. It's not very long, it's a common word. All these factors mean that password could easily be guessed by an attacker. Earlier, we discussed the fact that changing characters in a password provides minimal benefit. Let's take a look at them. For example, I'll do some classic character substitutions, adding an @ there, maybe a $, here, and a 0 there. Easy password to memorize. But it would probably meet corporate security policies or 8 or more characters using a combination of letters, numbers, and symbols. However, we're still looking at 0 seconds decrypting this password, because once again, it's using a classic dictionary word, and it's definitely going to be in the dictionary of potential passwords that a cybercriminal is going to use. Hopefully, this is a demonstration on why you should never use a password like this. If we do something like a keyboard pattern, like QWERTY is a common password, 0 seconds. Dropping the Y makes it slightly better in that it would only take 0.02 of a second, because QWERT versus QWERTY, everyone uses QWERTY. Fewer people use QWERT, but again, vary. When you're generating a password, you want something that's long, random, and uses a variety of letters. I'm going to start randomly adding letters and numbers here. We have an 8-character password here that uses a combination of lower uppercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Please note that the time to crack this password is currently estimated at 1,000 years. We can't guarantee it's going to take this long, the attacker could get lucky, but this demonstrates that with a little bit of effort, you can make your passwords much, much more resilient to potential attacks. Hello, and welcome back to our discussion of phishing. In this video, we'll take a hands-on look at a couple of phishing emails and identify some of the big red flags and warning signs. Let's look at an example of a business email compromised, or a situation where the goal is to get you to pay for a service you never actually received. Here we're looking at a fake invoice for Norton 360 Total Protection. Norton is a reputable company that provides a variety of security services. Thus, it's entirely plausible that I bought Norton 360 Total Protection. However, I didn't, and even if I did, an examination of the contents of this email raises several red flags. To start, let's look at the email address associated with this. I've whited out the exact address, but notice the domain name at the end of the email, @gmail.com. Gmail is undoubtedly a legitimate email provider. However, most companies are going to use their actual domain name to send emails and not from a Gmail email account. I expect to receive an email from Norton's email address rather than from Gmail, so anything claiming to be a corporate email coming from Gmail is automatically a potential phishing email. Also, if we look at the to address on the right, we'll see it's nortoncc1.2023@outlook.com. Again, Outlook is not a corporate email. Just because it used Norton in the name doesn't mean anything. We're seeing something that implies it's phishing. I'm also suspicious that this email isn't personalized to me at all. Also, take note that the destination email is the word nortoncc1.2023, and I was included in a blind carbon copy. This sort of thing shows up if you're the recipient of a mass mailer. For example, if you look at a newsletter email from an organization, they probably sent it to themselves and then blind carbon copied or BCC'd you. Oddly, I have an invoice ID that's the same as everyone else they've sent this email to. Now, let's look at the contents of the email. Everything else here in the contents makes sense. The sender thanks me for my order and provides details: invoice number, product details, start date, end date, how to pay, and status completed. If my product costs $564, that also makes sense to me. However, if we look at the bottom, we see a message that raises some red flags again. We see, if you wish to not to continue and ask for a reimburse, then please feel free to call our refund and settlement department as soon as possible. You can reach us on, and a phone number is included. But this has a few different grammatical issues with it. That use of to not to continue asking for reimburse rather than reimbursement. There's also random capitalization. Then there's you can reach us on rather than at. All of these are red flags. If this was an actual invoice from Norton, they would do a better job of spell checking and grammar checking. We can conclude that this is a spam or phishing email. If we look closer, Gmail flagged this as a spam message. We can report it as not spam, but it states that the message was similar to other spam messages. Let's look at another one. This one is labeled as dangerous from Gmail rather than only spam. Let's start looking at the email address copied in the bottom right-hand corner. This one is also sent from a Gmail account. The reply address is mail2consultant.com. Its to address, again, is not to me. Notice how the BCC is my email address. What this indicates is that we have a mass mailer here. In this case, I've hit the jackpot and won United States dollar 1,500,000, not dollars, through the United Nations portion of her Experts Helping the Poor in Such Countless Nations of the World for COVID-19, which is misspelt, relief package. Obviously, this email again has a variety of spelling errors. The fact that it's a mass mailer for what's seemingly a personal message may seem suspicious. Also, if we investigate the details here, this is looking to collect sensitive information. It wants my full name, home address, telephone number, country, age, occupation, and other information. If we provide all this information, it's likely going to end up in a phishing attack or other attack. Also, a lot of the information that they're asking for, they've already provided to me, so why would I send this back to them with the same information they already know? For example, they asked me for a batch number, a reference number, a PIN number, and a winning number, all of which are included in the email. If they know the information, why do they need it? The answer is that they want additional information from us. This email appeals to a sense of greed. The senders hope you're willing to provide that information and the chance of winning contests you've never entered. These are two examples of phishing emails and some of the reasons why these emails are especially suspicious. Ensure that you watch out for these misspellings, email addresses, and other factors described in this video. Hello and welcome back to our discussion of VPNs. In this video, we will talk about how a VPN works. It's possible to set up a VPN if the VPN software runs on both sides of the network connection. This could be clients running on two different computers, but often a company will have a dedicated VPN, a server specifically dedicated to ending VPN connections and allowing the VPN users access to the corporate network. If a VPN user has software on their systems, they can have that encrypted connection to the VPN endpoint and have a user experience that's nearly identical to being directly connected to that remote network. All their traffic will be sent through that VPN, out of that endpoint, and then routed to its destination, whether inside or outside the organization. A VPN connection can be established or set up using various protocols. However, in a nutshell, they all come down to a few steps. The first step is establishing a shared key. As we mentioned, a VPN creates an encrypted connection or tunnel that your traffic can be sent over. With encryption, you need an encryption key and a decryption. Often, for large data transfers like a VPN, you will use a symmetric encryption algorithm, where both the encryption key and the decryption key are the same. The reason for this is that it's more efficient to use symmetric encryption than public key or asymmetric encryption. Initially, the VPN connection needs to set up a shared key. This might be using a password or a different type of protocol. Once you've got that shared key and you both are using the same VPN protocol, you have everything you need to set up a VPN. Your computer will encrypt all outgoing traffic. You will use all your applications such as web browsers, email, and anything that connects over the network. However, before the traffic from those applications leaves your computer, it's going to pass through that VPN software. The VPN software will wrap in encryption that prevents eavesdroppers or other threats from reading and modifying your data without detection. Once the traffic is encrypted, it'll be sent to its destination, which will be the location of that VPN endpoint or the other computer with this VPN connection. Once that traffic reaches that computer, the shared encryption key will decrypt the incoming traffic. It would have been as if you connected directly over the public internet or had a wire connected directly to it. At that point, the traffic will be routed to its destination. So, that might be another computer within a corporate network. It could be another computer located somewhere else on the internet, and then that computer can respond. Their traffic will go to the VPN endpoint, which will re-encrypt that traffic and send it back to you. All this VPN traffic travels over the public internet, but because it's encrypted, nobody else can access it. And that's why we have this virtual private network. That's basically how a VPN connection works. It's just using encryption to pretend you have that direct private connection when traffic flows over an untrusted public network, such as the internet. See you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to our discussion of online security threats. In this video, I'll discuss suspicious downloads and how internet browsing can install malware. Let's talk about Trojan horses. Malware can be delivered in a variety of different ways. Since it is malware, these delivery mechanisms aim to ensure you don't know that malware is being installed. There are a few different ways in which malware can accomplish this. One is vulnerability exploitation. When you're visiting internet websites, it is likely using a web browser. Since a web browser is software, it can occasionally have vulnerabilities that enable it to be exploited. Suppose your web browser, PDF readers, or anything else that you use to interact with content from the internet contains an exploitable vulnerability. In that case, an attacker might be able to take advantage of that vulnerability to install malware on your computer. That's one option for delivering malware. However, the more common option is Trojan horses. A Trojan type of malware looks like legitimate software and tricks users into downloading. So, for example, the Trojan may pretend to be a free version of some desirable software or a popular game. What you could be downloading is malware that gets installed onto your computer. Like how the Greeks, during the Trojan War, entered the city of Troy using a wooden horse, the malware gets installed by trickery. Different methods to protect yourself against malicious downloads can depend on how that malware is attempting to gain access to your computer. I already mentioned some types of malware exploit vulnerabilities to gain access, and most browsers aren't vulnerable, or at least they don't contain known exploitable vulnerabilities in their most recent versions. This means that if malware is taking advantage of vulnerabilities in your browser's PDF readers or other software, that software is probably outdated. Once a vulnerability becomes known, the software manufacturer tends to fix it promptly. It's important to promptly install updates to your web browsers, other software, and your computer's operating system. The sooner you install new updates, and especially security updates, the smaller the window in which an attacker might be able to use that vulnerability to gain access to your computer. Also, when dealing with malicious downloads, it's essential to use an up-to-date antivirus with automated scans. The reason why it's important to update your antivirus frequently is because antiviruses commonly have libraries of signatures or unique identifiers for new types of malwares. Updates to these antiviruses often include updates to that signature library. Your antivirus software may not have the latest threat updates if you're not letting your antivirus update when needed. Those are the threats that are more likely to infect your computer, so ensure you are getting the latest updates for your antivirus regularly. Automated scanning helps deal with the potential for malicious downloads and other malware. This is because people need to regularly perform vulnerability scans or scans for malware on their computers. Often, you're only going to manually run your antivirus scanner when you think you have a virus. By then, it's too late. If the malware is subtle, you might not even know it's there. With automated scans, you have a better chance that your antivirus is going to locate the malware and fix the problem sooner rather than later, which minimizes the risk that your malware could steal your data, encrypt it as ransomware, or take other malicious actions on your computer. How do we identify Trojan horse malware? Trojans gain access to computers by looking benign. If you see a website with a flashing banner ad across the top saying, "Click here for malware," I don't think you'd click there. Instead, these Trojans will look like legitimate software. The key to avoiding Trojans is identifying when a piece of software that you're downloading and running is more likely malware than legitimate software. Some best practices for avoiding Trojan horses include inspecting URLs. We talked about URLs in an earlier video. It's important to remember that most legitimate software will be distributed via the manufacturer's legitimate website. If you're downloading software from somewhere other than its creator's website, there's a possibility that it's malware that somebody's using to deliver malicious content. Look at the URL. Ensure you're on the right page before downloading. A second important thing to consider when downloading software is to be suspicious of free downloads. If you're downloading something that seems too good to be true, something like expensive office software for free, or an expensive game for free, or anything where you should expect to be paying for it, and you're not, that could be a red flag. Ask yourself, why are they distributing this for free? Sometimes there are promotions, but often it's on a non-legitimate website with a free offer, since they could be getting their money by installing malware on your computer. Finally, we have discussed antivirus software and their ability to identify malware on a computer. However, it must be running and checking that file to detect it. In addition to automated scanning, it's often a good idea to manually scan a file before opening it to ensure it's not malware before installing it on your computer. Remember, when you're on the internet, malware is one of the potential risks. Be cautious when browsing pages and downloading files. I'll see you in the next video, where I'll discuss trackers and cookies. Hello, and welcome back. In our final video about device security, we will focus on the security of mobile devices, your smartphone, tablet, and similar devices. We're focusing on mobile devices since they are increasingly a target of cyber attacks, and often cybersecurity training only focuses on your computer. We are often educated about using antivirus on computers, and we often emphasize phishing and other threats on a computer. Thus, it's important to consider that your mobile devices could be equally, if not more, vulnerable to attack than your desktop or laptop computer. We are increasingly using our mobile devices for various purposes. You likely have a phone in your pocket or near you. You might also have a smartwatch, a tablet, an e-reader, etc. Many people use mobile devices to access the internet, use social media, play games, and much more. Cybercriminals have figured this out, and they're focusing much more on mobile devices as a target for their attacks. Hence, it's important to secure those devices as well. Let's discuss some of the major threats to security of your mobile devices. One of these is malicious apps. There's a constant struggle between the operators of app stores like Google Play Store and Apple's App Store to protect against malicious apps. People will create malicious apps and submit them to the App Store. The App Store owners constantly try to identify and filter them out before users can install them on their computers. That ignores the potential risks of sideloading or installing apps from unapproved or secondary app stores. If you're installing a new app on your local device, there's always a chance that it's a Trojan containing malware. If an app gains access to your device and gains the permissions it needs, it could be stealing sensitive data or doing other nasty things on your device. On mobile devices, your apps might be insecure or vulnerable. They might have yet to be treated with software security best practices and may not be securely communicating over the internet. For example, if you're on a web browser, you can look at the address bar and see the lock icon that tells you that your web traffic is encrypted and no one can snoop on it. However, what about a mobile app? There's no equivalent to that lock icon at the time of this recording, so it could send sensitive information out in plain text for anyone to read. Alternatively, those apps might contain vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit to gain access to the data in the app itself or on the device it's installed on. A third major threat to mobile security is weak passwords or non-existent passwords. We use passwords to unlock your phone. We might have passwords for various apps. There's a decent chance that those passwords are easily guessable via an attack. For example, you might have a code of 1234 or no password on your mobile device. This is problematic because if someone gains access to your mobile device and logs into it, there's potentially sensitive information that they could steal and use for various purposes. Another potential threat to mobile security is public and open Wi-Fi. We'll talk about this more in our discussion of virtual private networks, or VPNs. If you're connected to a public Wi-Fi network, especially one without a password, there's a chance that someone might be able to eavesdrop on your network traffic. This is especially a risk with mobile devices since they're more likely to connect to these networks. Additionally, there's a chance that insecure and vulnerable apps are sending out your sensitive information. Finally, with mobile apps, there's a risk of out-of-date software. Performing updates to your phone can be a hassle since you can't use your phone or a particular app while those updates occur. There is a temptation to put off these updates, which means there's a higher probability that those apps and that phone have out-of-date software that could be vulnerable to attacks. These are some examples of some of the significant threats your mobile devices can face, even more so than a traditional desktop or laptop computer. What can we do to secure our mobile phone? There's a variety of different things. 1. Use a strong authentication. Ideally, your phone is encrypted and secured with a very strong random password. If not that, at least choose a number that someone's unlikely to guess and not 123 or the birthdays of anyone you know. 2. Install a mobile antivirus. The mobile antivirus is going to help identify and deal with those apps before they can cause damage to you and your mobile devices. Next, use a VPN on public Wi-Fi. We'll dive into this more in a later module because it is very important. Fourthly, only install apps from official app stores, like Apple and Google's app stores. The reason for this is that these app stores at least have a level of vetting of apps to help ensure that they're legitimate. Other third-party app stores might not be doing this, so they have a higher probability of malware. Alternatively, if you need an app that's not the official app store, get it directly from the creator's website or follow a link that they provide. When using apps, it's important to restrict mobile app permissions. Apps often request permissions that they don't need to perform their functions. This is problematic because those permissions can be abused by the apps or by an attacker who gains access to it. If an app requests too many permissions, it could be malware and a Trojan in disguise. Legitimate ones might request permissions you don't want to give, so be sure to audit those and only grant permissions that are necessary to do their job. Another important mobile security best practice is not to root or jailbreak your mobile devices, since you could be compromising some of the security features on your device. If an attacker can't get access to privileged parts of the operating system on the mobile device, they have less ability to attack other apps on the system to steal your data. If you've rooted or jailbroken your mobile phone, then the malicious apps have the potential to gain greater access, and they can abuse that access to attack your device or some applications and steal data. Finally, install updates promptly. Once a new vulnerability is discovered for any device or software, cybercriminals are actively trying to exploit that vulnerability. The faster you install an update, the smaller the chance they can find and compromise your device. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to our Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of passwords and password security. In this video, we're going to discuss how you can check for compromised accounts or if your password may have been exposed in a data breach. In the previous video, we looked at how quickly weak passwords could be cracked and how if you generate a strong random password, it's much more resilient against dictionary and brute force attacks. However, having a strong password isn't enough if you use the same password across multiple sites, and the concern that the password might have been breached in a security incident. There are a few different tools for determining if your password has been exposed to a data breach. One of the best ones out there is a site called Have I Been Pwned, which we see here on the screen. What this site lets you do is provide an email address or phone number and find out if your username, password, phone number, etc. has been exposed in a data breach. Let's use a simple email address, test@example.com. This is pretty much guaranteed to have been exposed in data breaches. We see here that it was pwned in 178 data breaches, and there were 82 pastes. If we scroll down here, we can get more information about the exact security incidents or data breaches that this particular email address and its associated information exposed. For example, we have 28,744 separate data breaches, a collection of about 3,000 alleged data breaches that were all put together into one dataset. It produced a collection of 80 million unique email addresses and a bunch previously seen in other breaches. In this case, we had an email address and a plaintext password available to attackers. This and every other breach we see in this list includes information available to an attacker. This site looks at various data sources used by a cybercriminal, such as the dark web, for information on data breaches, and if something's been found, provides information on it here. Tools like this are helpful to check periodically to determine if your information might have been compromised. For example, if you had a Poshmark account before mid-2018 and your information was compromised in that breach, it would be a good idea to go in and change your password to something more secure. In a nutshell, tools like this can help you determine if a password might have been exposed, or if a password that you reuse across multiple different accounts might have been exposed and place all of those accounts at risk. Hello, and welcome back to our Virtual Private Networks, or VPNs, discussion. In this video, we will talk about some important considerations when choosing a VPN solution. There are a few different types of VPN solutions, and the right VPN solution depends on your use case. If you want a VPN solution for remote work, you will have little choice in what you're using. Companies will have a corporate-approved solution for remotely connecting to their networks, and you will have to use what's provided to you. If you need a VPN for personal use and want to protect yourself while using your mobile devices and computers on public Wi-Fi, there are some options. Keep in mind there are a few security considerations to consider. One of these is that VPNs are not end-to-end encryption. This means that a VPN will encrypt your traffic as it travels from you to your VPN endpoint, wherever that is. It could be a public VPN provider, or it could be an endpoint on the corporate network. However, once it reaches that VPN endpoint, it is unencrypted and travels from there, just like it would have if you weren't using a VPN. So essentially, a VPN gets you from point A to point B without allowing anyone to eavesdrop on you, but there's still the chance that eavesdropping or other threats could occur from your VPN endpoint to the destination. Using a VPN for access to the corporate network is not a big deal because you're inside a protected file network. However, a VPN for public use changes the point where traffic will move out onto the public end. A second VPN security consideration is that a VPN provider can see traffic flowing over their systems. With your traditional internet network connection, if you're using your home internet, your traffic goes from you through your ISP and onto the internet. Thus, all of your traffic passes through the ISP. You may choose to use a VPN to conceal that traffic from the ISP provider. However, a VPN provider is going to have that same access and level of visibility as the ISP, because with a VPN, all your traffic goes encrypted to them, they unencrypt it, and then it flows onto its eventual destination. Therefore, you must trust your VPN provider more than you trust whoever you are trying to hide that traffic from, because they'll have the same level of visibility. A third consideration is that unencrypted traffic can leak sensitive information. Most of your web browsing is going to be encrypted. For example, if you're on a banking website. That's encrypted using SSL or TLS, the protocol used to encrypt web traffic, and gives you that lock icon in the address bar. However, there could be sensitive information in your traffic that could give hints about what you're doing, even if they can't see the bulk of the track. For example, if you're browsing a certain website and you need to get the IP address of that website via DNS or the domain name service. If you're making DNS requests for a website that you'd be embarrassed that anyone knows you're visiting, someone who can see that DNS request could potentially discover that you're visiting that website, even if they don't see your browsing traffic there. As we mentioned, your VPN provider will see all of your traffic flowing over to their systems. Finally, some sites might disallow VPNs. For example, if your entire purpose of installing a VPN is to allow you to use a movie streaming service in a place where access to certain shows might be blocked, a VPN may not help you, since the movie service can detect VPN usage. If you're getting a VPN, there are a few questions to consider. Firstly, why do you need it? There are a variety of different purposes for using a VPN. It's important to know what you're using that VPN for to help you decide what kind of VPN you'll need. For example, if you're using a corporate VPN, you won't have much of a choice. If you want a VPN for hiding your traffic from your ISP, cheaper options are available. However, if you're really concerned about the security and reputation of your VPN provider, you might have to pay a little more. Knowing your use case is essential to understanding the right solution. A second important question is, if the VPN is free, how do they make their money? There are certainly free VPNs out there. If a VPN provider is offering a completely free VPN, there's a chance that the reason is they're collecting and selling data about you. As we mentioned, the VPN provider has visibility into the traffic flowing over their systems. Therefore, they might be paying for the infrastructure and the services they provide by collecting and selling customer data. Depending on your use case for a VPN, this might defeat the whole purpose. Finally, are security reviews and ratings available for the VPN product? You want to ensure you have a reputable VPN solution, just like an antivirus. It's worth doing some research to ensure that there are no security concerns and that you're getting a reputable product instead of one that might just be selling your data. Before choosing a VPN solution, ask those questions to help you determine what you need and whether a particular VPN is a good solution for you. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to our Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of multi-factor authentication. In some of the previous lectures, we discussed multi-factor authentication, why you might want to use it, and some of the better and worse forms of MFA. In this video, we will provide an overview of how to configure MFA for your online accounts. The first step is determining whether or not multi-factor authentication is even available. A website might list this option under a variety of different names. There are some of the most common ones you might see, like multi-factor authentication, which is the general term for using two or more factors for using authentication. A more specific term is two-factor authentication, which means using exactly two factors, rather than potentially using three or more in an MFA scenario. Another term is two-step authentication. Same thing, just a slightly different name. A website could use enhanced account security or enhanced authentication. If it is offering a stronger authentication or sign-in experience, it's probably some form of multi-factor authentication. Reviewing the account security pages, the account management, security, password, or login ages for an online account is where you'll find options for this. There are a variety of different forms of multi-factor authentication that you can configure for an online account. We talked about options like SMS-based one-time passwords, using a physical token, a smart card, or biometrics. However, one of the more generally available and generally secure options is using an app-based multi-factor authentication system. This is how it works. You install an app on the smartphone, an app like Google Authenticator. Many password managers offer app-based authentication as well. You start by synchronizing the app with the website. There are a couple of different options for this. Often you have the choice to either scan a QR code or the website will display a setup key, where it's a series of characters and you type it into your authenticator. It sets up a shared state between the server and your smartphone. At regular intervals, both the server and the smartphone will update the acceptable code that the smartphone will provide, and the server will accept. Since they start at the same point and use the same algorithm, they're always going to be in sync. However, they're never going to need to communicate with one another via text message or email, etc. This provides a secure means of setting up multi-factor authentication that limits the communication from being intercepted, since there is no communication to intercept. Consider installing an authenticator app on smartphones and review what online accounts offer this form of authentication or multi-factor authentication, rather than something less secure like an SMS-based one. This is an example of a something you have form of MFA because you need your smartphone to authenticate to assist. In the next video, we'll discuss identifying phishing attacks designed to steal those one-time passwords that this and other forms of MFA can generate. Hello and welcome back to our discussion of online security. In this video, we will be talking about trackers and cookies and the various ways websites can track your identity and follow you around the internet. So, what are trackers and cookies? When you're browsing online, targeted advertising is a profitable business. You probably see ads every day when you're online. Many of those ads might not have any relevance to you. If you ignore the ad, the advertiser has wasted time and money getting it in front of your eyes. Advertisers want to ensure that their ads are being displayed to the people who are most likely to buy their products, which means they need to understand who's possible to buy products and who you are. So, ad targeting requires an understanding of users and their habits. For example, if an advertiser knows that you've recently had a baby, then you're probably going to get ads about baby clothes, toys, and diapers. To perform this ad targeting, they need to identify you and figure out what your interests are, life events, and other identifiable information, and track you across multiple different websites. For example, if you sell baby clothes and you only have insight into a user's activity on your site, you might be targeting the wrong internet users, since the ones you want to sell to never actually visit your website. Trackers and cookies are methods by which advertisers can accomplish this tracking of users across different websites. Let's talk about how trackers and cookies work. A cookie is a text file that's stored on a device that contains data for a particular website. For example, when you've been logged into various sites online, you've probably experienced a website that allows you to remember you. Enter your credentials, and then if you revisit the site again, you might not need to log in again. It just opens your profile for you. This means that that website can identify who you are in the future and load your profile. The reason why this works is that website places a cookie on your computer that stores your authentication information. Thus, if you keep logging in from that computer, the website can identify you from the cookie. Cookies can be used to help relog you in without authenticating again, but they can also be used to store information about you and to track your activities on the web. Trackers are tools, bits of software designed to collect information about a web browser. The most straightforward bit of tracking they can do is to get the IP address of the computer you're browsing, since that information is included in data that you send them over the internet. Trackers can also collect information about your device, the type of web browser you use, the type of computer you're using, and much more. All of these can be used to assemble a digital fingerprint that uniquely identifies you. If they have that fingerprint and can correlate information across multiple sites, they can then start to build a profile about who you are, what you're interested in, and a lot more. This profile and tracking data can then be used to personalize a web experience for target advertising. If they know who you are and what interests you, they can ensure that the ads displayed are relevant to you and that have the highest probability of getting you to buy their product. Trackers and cookies can have their advantages. If you want targeted ads that are based on your unique interest, they can be helpful. However, they can also be a threat to your privacy online. If somebody's building these profiles about you, they know a lot about who you are, and they can sell that information to third parties and potentially have it exposed in data breaches. This very in-depth, detailed profile about you might not stay as private as you'd like. If you don't want this highly targeted advertising, many ad blockers and similar tools can block cookies and trackers. They can also prevent files from being written on your computer and help block the execution of the types of scripts and programs within a web page that would collect information and send it to an advertiser. However, it is crucial to check reviews and other sources to verify that these ad blockers and tools are legitimate before installing them. You could inadvertently install an ad blocker whose purpose is to act as a tracker. You're letting it see everything you do online. It can collect the same information that the websites would, and it can sell those very in-depth profiles to someone else. In conclusion, check reviews and ensure that things are legitimate before you allow them on your computer and then on your browser. Welcome back to our discussion of phishing attacks. Previously, we looked at some phishing emails and explored how they work. In this video, we're going to talk about phishing without email. Often, cybersecurity training focuses on phishing emails. The reason for this is it's where phishing attacks begin. Not that long ago, email was the primary and almost sole means of corporate communication and collaboration. Therefore, it was the ideal medium for sending messages to someone and trying to trick them into doing something. However, technologies and companies evolved, and emails aren't the only way people communicate. As a result, phishers have also adapted to other media types, providing them with a few different benefits. Thus, there's the potential to evade security solutions. For example, if you're focused on email as the only means they're performing a phishing attack, then phishing that comes in through a different medium might be missed. Suppose an employee expects that phishing only comes through email because that's where their cybersecurity training tells them to look. In that case, a phishing attack that comes via text message or social media could bypass their mental defenses. If you think phishing is only email and you get a text, you might not think this could be a phishing message. So phishing attacks can take advantage of benefits that are specific to particular media. For example, when we talk about SMS, known as short message service, link shortening services are common in text messages. They can be a phishing attacker's dream come true. Let's look at some non-email phishing media, starting with SMS messages. Smishing is phishing via text message or SMS. It gets its name because you have SMS in the word smishing. Attackers are increasingly using text messages in their phishing attacks. The reason for this is that there are various benefits for the attacker. One is constant connection. You might not be a person that constantly checks your email, but you likely check your text messages more than your email. If you're used to frequently whipping out a phone, reading the message and hitting reply, then there's a better chance that an attacker will be able to slip something past your defenses. If you're used to quickly looking at something, doing whatever it says, responding, you might be willing to hand over some potentially sensitive information without thinking and click on a link. Another advantage of SMS that I've touched on is link shortening services. These will be things like bit.ly that take this long link that could fill up a text message and turn it into something much shorter. You click on the link, it's translated to the longer URL, and you're sent to whatever page you're supposed to go to. Now, these can be handy, but they can also be cybersecurity headaches. The reason for this is that link you're looking at. You have no idea where it goes. It's not like the traditional URL, where if you look at it on your phone, you can see, hey, this goes to evilsite.com, I shouldn't click on it. Instead, you're looking at this SMS. It's going to look like a link shortener such as bit.ly with a little code at the end, and you have no idea where it's going to go to. You can't easily hover over links with a phone to see where they go. If you click on that shortened link on your phone, it'll take you to some site, and you might not even think to check the URL on the site to make sure it's legitimate. Finally, SMS has the benefit that organizations are increasingly using SMS for their customer service. For example, you've probably received account notifications from various service providers on your phone or fraud notifications from your bank. We've grown accustomed to getting these sorts of messages on our phone. If an attacker can convince you that their message is legitimate when they're masquerading as one of these things, you're more likely to click on it and potentially provide sensitive information. This is why banks and other sites often state something like, "We'll never ask you for this code," when they're giving you a two-factor code. Attackers could try to get that code and use it to log in as you on the bank's website. Text messages can be beneficial for an attacker because of how we deal with them on a day-to-day basis and how we think. There are other non-email methods of phishing. There are also social media and corporate collaboration platforms, Slack being one example. Many people have at least one or several social media accounts. Almost all of these platforms support direct communication. If you think about this, the communication on these platforms is essentially just an email or text message on a different platform, which can be used for many of the same attacks we discussed. However, the advantage of social media or collaboration platforms for an attacker is that you may be more willing to trust messages on these platforms. You perform some vetting if you can only get messages from friends and connections. Thus, if you've already vetted Angela, why would you think she would be attacking you? You're more likely to think, okay, this is a legitimate email, a legitimate message, a legitimate link. Click on that link, provide sensitive information, etc. In a broader sense, with social media, there's potentially much more personal information residing on those platforms, making it easier for an attacker to collect data and build a believable pretext to make the spear phishing attack more effective. To sum up, phishing is not just about email. Email is a large part of it, but there's also a consideration for SMS, social media messages, and corporate collaboration platforms. Anything you receive messages on could be a vector for phishing attacks. We've reached the end of this Introduction to Cybersecurity course. Throughout the course, there were demonstrations on how to make a strong password, test if your passwords have been compromised, and discussions about cybersecurity tools to consider using, including password managers, VPNs, and antivirus. I appreciate you taking the time to join us, and I hope to see you in a later course. Bye for now. Hello, and welcome back to this Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of multi-factor authentication. In this video, we're going to discuss one of the major threats to MFA security, phishing attacks. The goal of multi-factor authentication is to improve the security of a user's accounts. Instead of using just a password to log into an account, you might need to use a combination of a password and something else. That something else might be a one-time password generated on a device or texted to you. Or it might involve biometrics or a physical token that you plug into or tap against your computer. The use of MFA isn't great for cybercriminals since it makes it a lot harder for them to gain access to those accounts or to use the passwords they've stolen or guessed. They've developed methods of trying to bypass or defeat MFA. One of the most common is phishing. Some forms of multi-factor authentication are vulnerable to phishing attacks. Whenever you enter some information into a login page, there's a possibility that you could be tricked into entering that information somewhere you shouldn't, whether that's sending the code to an attacker or whether it's entering it into a login page on a fake phishing site. If an attacker could get access to both your password and a one-time password used for MFA, then they can potentially log into your account and pretend to be you. Let's talk about some of the potential warning signs of MFA phishing. Cybercriminals can steal these MFA codes in a few different ways. One of these is asking for the code. A cyber attacker isn't going to say, "Hey, I'm a cybercriminal, hand over your code." They're going to use some form of trickery to convince you to hand it over to them. For example, you might have an MFA code set up for an online account. The customer service or alleged customer service for that account might say, "Okay, we're going to message you a one-time password. If you can just text that back to us, then we'll know it's you and we'll perform whatever action." You might have this conversation over text or get a text with the code. They mentioned they were going to send a text with the code, it was sent, and you need to send that info. In reality, behind the scenes, what's going on here is the attacker has the website that you're using generate a one-time code for you. Let's assume they have your username and password. They try to log in and give you the site with that SMS one-time password. They'll provide you with options for getting that code, such as texting you. If they try to log in as you, they'll generate that code to be sent to you. You'll see that code, assume that it's a response to your requests, you'll text that code to the attacker, enter it in, and now they're into your account. The fact that an attacker or that someone claims we're sending a code to you and you get a code from a legitimate source doesn't mean that they are a legitimate source. They could have triggered that sending of that code through some other means, and this doesn't have to happen via an SMS-based MFA. They could simply say, "Okay, we're your bank," and convince you that they are telling you to authenticate yourself. We need the current one-time password for your Authenticator app. You provide that, they log in as you, and they have access to your bank. That's one example of an MFA phishing attack. Another one is directing you to a fake site entirely. A standard phishing page designed to look just like the legitimate page for your bank or other online account. You log into your account, which requires providing your username, password, and a one-time password. You provide that, and behind the scenes, what that website will do is send that information to an attacker. For that time period, when the code is valid, they'll be able to log in as you as well. With these ways to steal MFA codes, it's important to be aware of phishing. If someone asks you to send them a code, it's potentially a phishing scam. Do not send the code. When logging into a website, you must ensure that the URL or web address is legitimate and that you're not providing that password and code to a potential attacker. We'll talk more about these sorts of phishing attacks in an upcoming lecture. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to our discussion of phishing attacks. We've been focusing on direct phishing, where there's malicious content in emails, texts, social media, and messages. In this video, we will talk about an indirect form of phishing using the cloud and cloud-based document sharing. Before we dive into document sharing on the cloud, let's talk about the why. The why for using cloud documents for phishing is email scans. Many organizations have some form of email scanning solution designed to protect them against phishing attacks. These scanners will inspect the email's content, links, and attachments, looking for warning signs of a phishing attack. It could be linked to a malicious page, malware attachments, or oddities in the phrasing text that points to a potential scam or phishing attack. With these email scanners, it can be difficult for an attacker to slip a malicious email past your organization's defenses. As a result, some phishing emails will embed malicious content in a shared cloud document. It could be a link in that document or a pointer to malicious content. Using the cloud has a few benefits for an attacker. One of these is the ability to avoid or evade email scans. Often, an email scanner will focus on only the email. If there's a shared cloud document, it won't touch that document. That means you could send a perfectly benign email sharing a malicious document, which might slip past the email scanner. Secondly, there's the use of trusted domain names. If an email scanner is looking for malicious content in an email and for malicious links, it's looking for links pointing to known bad domains. However, if you're sharing a Google Doc, the domain name in those links will be google.com, which is well trusted. This makes it hard for email scanners to identify and block malicious content easily. An organization can't stop everything from Google.com to thwart the risk of potential external malicious Google documents. Often, these attacks take advantage of the cloud brand reputation. If you use legitimate services in the cloud's platform to implement those phishing attacks, the shared documents or cloud-based applications can look very convincing and legitimate and still send you something malicious. So what do we do about cloud phishing? It's safest not to open unsolicited shared documents. If someone inside the organization is sharing a document with you, there's a decent chance that they will warn you about it and give you some context. Like, I'll send over this document to get your thoughts on it, there'll be an email along with it. If you're getting a shared document without any context, or if that context looks like a phishing email, don't open it. It's safer not to access it. Be cautious of links within shared documents, since an email scanning solution might not look at those. There may be malicious links in a document that would have been blocked if they existed in an email. I'll see you in the following video. Welcome back to the Introduction to Cybersecurity course and our discussion of passwords and password security. So far, we've been focusing on some of the threats to passwords and best practices for using secure passwords. In this video, we'll talk about one of the tools that can help us accomplish this, a password manager. When we discussed passwords and password security, we focused on the fact that you need to use a strong, unique password for every site you have an account on. That can quickly become unfeasible or unusable. The average person has dozens of online accounts, and memorizing, for example, a 10-character completely random password for each account could become problematic. Password managers can help by ensuring that your passwords are strong and unique by generating them for you and storing them for you. This means that instead of memorizing many strong, unique passwords, you let a password manager do that for you. Password managers work by storing passwords in an encrypted vault. Essentially, you've got this massive list of passwords associated with all of your online accounts, and when you're not using them, those passwords are encrypted using strong security. That robust encryption algorithm will be challenging to break. However, when you want to use those passwords, you must authenticate to that vault. Typically, the password manager will have a primary password for the password manager, or potentially use something like biometric authentication. If you're using a password manager on a smartphone, you might be able to log in using fingerprint or facial recognition. Once you've proven your identity to the password manager, it can decrypt the password that you have and allow you to log in to other online accounts. Password managers can be a massive help for security, but they also could create security risks if you don't use them properly. Some security best practices when using a password manager include the following. Set a strong vault password. With a password manager, you have one password that gives you access to your other passwords. Thus, eliminating the need to memorize these other unique passwords makes managing your online accounts and password security much easier. However, that single password can be a huge single point of failure if it's weak. Instead of using something that might be shorter, easily guessable, put in the effort to create and memorize one long random password to use for the password manager, and it can manage access to all of the rest of them. Another best practice is to auto-generate passwords using the password manager. It's possible to create and store your passwords in the password manager, but there's a decent chance that something you create yourself won't be long enough or random enough to really be secure. To get the full benefit from a password manager for security, consider having it automatically generate long random passwords for you rather than try and create them yourself. A third consideration for password security is on-device vault storage. A password manager can store encrypted vault passwords on your device or in the cloud, and both have their pros and cons. If you store some of your passwords in the cloud, you can access them from anywhere. Any device that you're working with, you can use the password manager on it and get your passwords. However, your encrypted password vault is stored with a third-party organization. If they're breached and someone can guess your vault password, they can have access to all your passwords. In contrast, on a password manager that offers storage of your passwords on your device, you can only use the passwords on the device where they're stored, but they're not up in the cloud where someone might be able to gain access to them. Finally, many password managers offer autofill for websites. So, you can put a browser extension on Chrome, Firefox, or some other web browser, and if you're on a website and have a password stored, it will autofill that password for you. The reason for this is that your password manager isn't going to fall for a phishing attack, where you might have a URL or a website address that looks okay, but it isn't. It's only going to autofill if you're on the correct site, or where you've stored that URL for. Enabling autofill is a good option because if your password manager doesn't autofill your password, there might be something wrong with the site, and that's a warning sign that you may have accidentally ended up on a phishing site. Password managers can be a useful tool for security. However, it's important to use them securely. Use a strong password. Let it do the heavy lifting of generating your passwords for you. Consider storing your vault on a particular device, and then enable autofill to protect against those phishing sites.